As we all know, brass is getting harder to find and more expensive every day. How would you like a way to extend your brass's life, help increase consistency when you reload, and get rid of those ugly clickers? I'm going to show you a tool that can do just that. Let's go take a look. And this is it. This is the Rollsizer. Now, there's sort of been some whisperings at matches about people that have been using these. I know there's people who have won some really big matches, national style matches, using these lately. And it's sort of out in the open now. Eric Cortina has them available for sale on his website, and I had to grab one. So I reached out to the owner who is over in Australia, and I said, hey, walk me through what this thing does and what makes it so special. And he said that, really he's been doing this for years. He's a mechanical engineer by trade, and I think he's been a mechanical engineer for like 30 years, and a competitive shooter. And it really started with like speed steel and 3-gun, IPSC, a lot of those kinds of things where you've got high volume cases that are really prone to bulging, like 9mm or 38 Super, 9 Major or something. Anyway, I'm not in that field, but there's a lot of really specialized pistol cartridges. And then you of course have 223 that can be used, and it runs into a situation where if you're processing a lot of brass, you may not always catch brass that can't fit into the chamber properly, even when you're using a full-length sizing die. And if you are doing something like speed steel and you have a failure to feed, you get a 0 on that stage. You're done. And so it was sort of this whole like perfect storm of, okay, if we can make sure everything feeds properly, if we can make brass last longer, if we can make sizing more consistent. And that put him down the path of creating the original Rollsizer line, which are more of a dedicated machine. He does a 223, he does a pistol one, and those ones can be automated. They're actually really cool. I just don't shoot any cartridges that have ever needed to use them. But then, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, I heard about maybe the chance that he was going to make something that was a little more universal, or something that could handle larger cartridges. And this is it. So this is the universal Rollsizer, and it is much smaller than its brethren. It cannot be automated. It's not motorized. In fact, he's got it all over the instruction manual. Don't motorize it. It will instantly void your warranty. And I'm going to show you how it works in a minute, but let's really talk about what it does for precision shooting. And it's largely the same kind of thing that it does for what he designed it, which is it's going to reduce your base bulge. It's going to help reduce clickers, which is not always an issue for people, but there are some cartridges that tend to be prone to clickers under certain conditions. And it's also going to help with reliability and consistency of your full-length sizing. So what does it do? Well, I'm going to show you the unit, and then I'm going to kind of show you a couple of the pieces inside of it here in a minute. But let's just look at the basics before I get an overhead camera on this to really show you how it's going to work. And what it does at its core is it is sort of an oblonged pressure plate, or it's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And it's oblong, and when you turn the handle, it is going to rotate this plate. Now, when you rotate that plate against a stationary bearing, it's going to apply pressure. Using this micrometer setting here, you can direct the amount of distance that is given between the pressure plate and the rotating block, and then that's going to ultimately give you your new roll-sized dimension. Now, clickers, whether people want to admit it or not, are a thing, especially at least in F-class, and I don't know if this is happening in PRS, but as people are really pushing the ballistics of given cartridges, they are increasing pressures, they are using powders that maybe are just out of line for that cartridge a little bit, which are doing different things with the pressures. And all of that is going to put an additional pressure on the case as you are using it. And I'm just telling you, it's ultimately going to lead to having clickers at some point. Even with 284, which is a pretty standardized cartridge at this point, I know a number of competitive shooters that after usually 6, 7, 8 firings, they would run to a small base die just to get that down a little bit and help reduce even clickers on 284. So that brings up the next thing. Well, I have a small base die. Why do I need the Rollsizer? Well, they do a couple different things. Now, a small base die is going to come down and it's going to hit that bulge and it's going to help, but you are still exerting a continuous pressure around that bulge, which can be a little inconsistent, and you're not guaranteed that you're getting 100% of the base when you do it. Now, the difference with the Rollsizer is in how it actually contacts the sides. So let me set up a different camera here. We're going to look at this from a different angle, and then we are going to show you exactly how this thing operates. And we're gonna get it set up now. I've got a couple cameras around me. I'm sorry for the distraction, but I do think it's gonna help everything make a little more sense because we have a nice top-down shot, and then we're going to have an angle shot over here because there's a couple different things that you kind of need to understand about this. Now, at its core, it is incredibly simple. You have a handle that works with a gear reducer that is going to turn this, oblong shape around. Over here is really where everything is happening that makes sense. And I'm going to do my best to point it out here. So first we have a bearing, and that is just a plain roller bearing over here. And then you have this right here. Now, if you notice, this stops, okay? And that stops because of the micrometer here. But because of that, once you put a piece of brass in, and I'm just going to do this here real quick, you can see there's a little arrow that tells you where the dimple is to put a piece of brass in. But now it's going to, and you can just sort of see it get pushed back. And once it hits the stop, it has a roller bearing on this piece as well that is going to now block here and push it between these two roller bearings as it compresses. And I can feel a little bit of pressure, obviously, and then it's going to pop, and then you are done. And you can definitely see that there is a little bit of wear from about there down, and that's going to tell you that you've rolled it, okay? Now, there's a couple things to setting it up, and I just want to show you real quick. So let me pull this out, and I'll get my hands out of the way in a second here. So one of the really nice things about what he's done is if you need to remove the pressure pendulum or whatever you want to call it, it's obviously pretty tough because it's on a shaft. You can't really get your fingers in. So he has this little offset screw hole, and you just thread that you just thread the screw that you brought out of here, and now you can just lift this right out. And this shows you one of the most important things, which is going to be this little, it kind of reminds me of like a finger here, right? So you've got a, hey. And this finger is labeled both small and then large. Now large is going to be for, and I can't remember the exact cartridges, but I want to say it was like 416 and above, something like that. I mean, pretty big cartridges. And it has to do with where it sits in here, because it's going to actually, when it's in the large setting, it's going to drop down so that you are rolling the right part of those giant cases. Almost everything else is going to be on the small setting, and you simply pull back, and there's a little ledge for the small one to sit on, and then a depression for the large. So we want it to go in like this, and I'm just going to drop it in there. And there is a little indexing key on it. If you didn't see, let me pull it out. There's two little indexing keys on here, and you are simply going to put these in, and you will feel it sort of lock in place right there. And you just want to make sure that's where it is. Now, I will tell you, after I moved, it can jostle up and out a little bit if it's turned upside down or on its side or something. So if you are moving this, maybe you're keeping it in a drawer, something like that, you really do want to make sure that you are checking this piece specifically so that you are good to go. Obviously, you want to make sure that your micrometer setting is where you want it to be as well. But this piece, if not inserted correctly, can, not ruin a day, but possibly ruin some brass. There is a key on this shaft that you're going to line up here. Okay, and then we are going to lock it down. And it doesn't take a lot of pressure because it is a keyed piece. It doesn't rely on the pressure of this screw, right, or this bolt. So I just get it hand tight. It doesn't need to be any more than that because it's keyed, so it's going to apply the pressure. Honestly, even if this wasn't in, it would still work. It's just more likely to move up and down a little bit. And so you just want to hold it in place. You'll also notice there's an X over here and a direction, so you know which way it's turning. And I believe that he states that you're supposed to have the arrow facing the X when you are making your adjustments, because that's going to be at the tightest part on the opposite end. You know, I've made adjustments a couple different ways, and I think as long as you're taking measurements on the brass, and I'll show you here in a second, but when you're taking measurements on the brass and then making an adjustment and then bringing a new piece of brass every time, which is what I was doing, and then rolling it, you have pretty good success. Let me show you one other little just small maintenance thing real quick while I'm pulling this out. So if I pull out this again, you'll notice that it is nice and bright and shiny right here. And that is, you know, the way it's supposed to look. Now, if you have dirty brass or over time, and you can see I've got a little bit of a dirt line almost forming in here. And as a result, you know, there's a little bit of buildup because I'm going to be rolling shot brass. But periodically, I just take a paper towel and wipe that off. You could use a little bit of alcohol if you want. It's not a big deal, but it is something that you definitely want to make sure that you are keeping an eye on when it comes to, you know, just maintaining the unit here. It's important to note that just like on a sizing die, where if you size with dirty brass, you're going to want to clean that sizing die a lot more often. And with a clean brass and you're sizing it, it's going to require a little less cleaning. In either case, you do want to make sure that you're cleaning out that sizing die. I typically do mine every 100 to 200 rounds. The same thing goes for the Rollsizer. You're going to want to pull this out like I showed you, wipe it off, stick it back in, and you're good to go. It is very easy, and I've been doing it every, like I said, about every 100 to 200 rounds, and it has had a really big effect on keeping that consistency there, just like I want it with my sizing dies. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was using this just a minute ago, it does not take a lot of hand pressure here in order to rotate it. It's a very efficient gear reducer over here. Technically, on the back side here, I haven't shown it to you, but you can insert an indicator. It does need a little bit longer stem on it. Unfortunately, I don't have an indicator with a stem that long. And really, I'm not really doing enough changes that the indicator is probably going to serve me. But I could see where having that indicator is nice, because even though this micrometer is very responsive, having that indicator is going to really show you where this plate is moving. So if you're making really small adjustments or something, that indicator is actually pretty cool to have. Not a requirement, and keep in mind it doesn't come with it. So we're set up. I have this set to where I want it to be. And you might be saying, well, how do you know where to set it? Well, I'm going to tell you that's where there's no right answer. This comes down to test, test, test. And in my case, I have taken a piece of, and you can see right here, I just come in with a factory piece of brass, and I'm at 529.5, right at the measurement that I'm taking. Now, yes, I know, I'm not using micrometers, I'm using calipers. If I wanted super, super precision measurement, I would be using a set of micrometers. But guess what? I don't have any. And the calipers for what I'm doing are going to be more than accurate enough so that I'm getting a number where I want to be, and I can check consistency within about half a thousandths. And really, at the end of the day, that is good enough for me. Your mileage may vary. If you have a set of micrometers, go for it. Typically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the base right here before it goes into the rim area here. And then I just set my micrometer right on the edge of that, and that's typically where I'm going to take a measurement. And if you want really consistent results in terms of what adjustment you're making versus what is happening to your brass, you can obviously take a hand reading like I did. Now, I have a pretty good idea of where my measurement line is, and I feel like I do a really consistent job. But if you aren't sure, what you can do is simply lay your caliper down and then close it over it and take a reading, because your jaws are actually going to sit just a hair above, and they're going to put the actual jaws right at about the 200 line. But more importantly, it's going to be a consistent point where you are taking a reading. So when you take a reading and then make an adjustment, go back down onto the bench, take a reading and see what that is coming in at. That is a really great way to have a consistent measurement and a consistent result on the Rollsizer. Now I'm taking it back to virgin dimensions, and that's just what I have found for me personally has worked really well so far. Now I may start coming up a little bit from that, so instead of 529.5, I might be at 530 or 530.5. In fact, I think the brass I'm going to show you was actually a test box where I had come out a little bit more, and there's nothing wrong with that. What you need to figure out is, what is your fired dimension? What is your chamber dimension? What is your sizing dimension on your actual die? And then make sure that whatever you're rolling is somewhere in there to make sense. And if you don't understand or don't know what you're doing, you may not be in the market for one of these. So I will just say, take care, because anytime you're applying pressure or putting something into your brass dimensionally, you have the chance to ruin your brass or cause a problem. So this really should be when you are, pretty experienced with reloading. This is not going to be for the guy who's just getting going and wants to, have every cool tool. So I will just say that up front. I also, please understand, this is not something that everybody needs or is going to want, and that's okay too. I think it's a really good tool. I think it serves a really good purpose for my particular needs. And like I said, I know a lot of top competitors who are using them. Does that mean you have to have one? Absolutely not. There are plenty of tools that we use that are not necessary to achieve, really good results. It's simply about having additional tools like this that make my job easier to achieve those results. And that's really the difference here. So let's look at some of the brass that I have done. I'm just going to go ahead and grab a piece out of here and drop it in just to show you one more time. And again, we want this arrow pointing in between the two rollers. We're going to drop the brass in. We're going to start to turn. And you can see I can do this with one finger here. It's very easy pressure. It does not hurt at all to do. And once I've rolled this and I take a measurement where I want to be, I'm going to be at 530. Oops, I'm going to be at 530 on this particular brass. And that is good enough for me. If I wanted to be at 529.5 and I'm at 530, I'm right in that range that I want to be. But what I thought you might find interesting is I have a piece of strictly sized brass, I have strictly roll-sized brass, and then I have roll-sized and sized. So if I take a measurement on just a sized piece of brass, I'm at 531.5 down at my measurement area, which is right around the 200 line. So 530, depending on pressure and whatnot, and again, I know a micrometer would make this easier, but we're gonna say 532 if I'm putting a light touch on it here, 532. Now, if I take roll-sized brass, I'm coming in at 529.5. So 529.5 against 532. So almost 2.5 thousandths difference. And this brass has been fired 2 times now. And what that shows me and what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that even if I use a really good sizing die, which I have really good sizing dies, it is still not going to move that area where you get the bulge at or below the 200 line. Let's talk a little bit more about what the Rollsizer is really doing. And to do that, the best way to illustrate it is to show you a couple of cases that I have covered in Sharpie here. And you can see I have one where I've done what essentially is going to be the full length sizing. And then this one I only did the bottom because we're only interested in what the Rollsizer is touching. As I've said before, and I did incorrectly state that, I didn't actually state that it was burnishing, which is really what it's doing as it's rolling around. It's burnishing. It's not doing any damage or anything else other than just, that's why it has sort of that roll mark on it. But we're going to show you with the Sharpie here where it is actually rolling compared to a full-length size. And I think that's important to understand because a full-length size is still going to touch a lot of the case. And I'm using a great die. This is my Cortina die. It is a 100% perfectly fit die to my chamber right now, and it is what I should be using. So you're going to see how far it does size, but that does not mean that it's getting the very last bit at the base where bulge is going to show up. So let's do this. First, I'm going to take my Nexus press here, and I'm just going to spray my case, and that's going to loosen up this Sharpie just a little bit. And you're going to see here now, if we look, and this can be tough, But if you look here, you're going to see that there is still a pretty good line right at the bottom, and that is the area that was untouched by the sizing die. Now, correspondingly, let's head over to the Rollsizer. And now that we have the Rollsizer, and you'll see I actually just brought it over from the studio bench, but you can see I can actually use this without actually bolting it down, which is actually pretty cool if you need to. But I'm going to go ahead and take this piece now, and you're going to see that it is being burnished right here all the way down to the very bottom of the base. And I think this really gives you a great illustration. If we put these side by side, you're going to see the difference in what is being roll sized versus full length sized, where there is some overlap, and of course where you are actually diminishing the bulge that is being created. So you can see just between these two, simply sizing versus roll sizing, that base area is now 2.5 thousandths to 2.5 thousandths lower than it originally was. Now, if I run a piece of roll sized brass through my sizer and take a measurement, because I know people are wondering, now I'm at 530, still. So 529, 530 is right where my measurement would be. So roll sizing and then running it through a sizer does not suddenly make this bulge again, because I've had that question asked as well. So you can see what effect it has there. Now, unreported effects, and I'm just saying because it's come up either on my Patreon or on YouTube or out in the field at the range where I've been talking to people about this, and the questions come up. Does it prevent pockets from opening up? And the guy who designed this, and by most accounts, people will say no. It is not designed, and he will just tell you flat out, it is not designed to save your primer pockets. So it's not going to crush that base down. It's not going to save your primer pockets. However, because you are maintaining the brass, there is always an opportunity for that line to be a little tighter in general. And I do know some shooters who claim that they are getting far more firings just from a primer pocket perspective than they were without using the Rollsizer. Is that correlation or causation? I don't really know. It's tough without doing just a ton of firing on a couple pieces of brass, and to be honest, I just don't have that ability right now, so I can't tell you. The other thing that comes up is brass life. Now, I am a firm believer at this point, just having done this for a number of firings, that you will see some gain in brass life. Now, depending on the cartridge, how hard you're working it, like it's going to be different for everybody, and that's okay. But the truth is, at some point, I do believe you're going to see some lengthening of your brass usability with it. Now, possibly if you have a really good designed reamer and brass and you're easy on your loads and you're doing everything right, is it going to make a huge difference? Probably not. If you are somebody who's using a really high pressure load and you're really working your brass and maybe your dies to your chamber aren't exactly right and this and that, yes, I think you will see a much larger gain in your brass life. There are plenty of people I know who are shooting Magnum cartridges who are in the 10 to 15 firing range without ever touching a Rollsizer, and that's fine. I also know people who are at or beyond that using a Rollsizer. Again, I think it's going to be very user and usage dependent, and that's where I think really something like this tool becomes such a firestorm. People say, oh, you don't need it, oh, I need it, it's going to fix this, it's going to fix that. I think there is a lot of, I'm just going to quantify it as black magic in this, that like we kind of jokingly use that term black magic. Does it do something? Yes. Have we completely quantified what it is? I don't know yet. The way I look at it is this was about $900. And if I'm buying 6.5 PRC brass at roughly, let's say $160 to $180, depending on when you get it on sale or find it, then if I buy 1,000 pieces of brass, that's $1,600. Let's just say I get a screaming deal and it's $1,500. So at $1,500 to, let's say, $1,800, depending on who and how you buy it, then it doesn't take long if you are getting extended firings for this to, at no other level, pay for itself. So if I get a couple extra firings out of every brass, maybe I get 5 extra firings, then suddenly I've extended the brass life and I'm getting my money back on the roller. It's important to note that along with brass life being extended, which is obviously a great thing, there are two other really important factors that go along with roll sizing, at least in my experience and from what the owner has reported over his years of working with it. And that is when you are sizing, it actually is requiring less effort from your machine, whether that's a Dillon, whether that's a Nexus, whether that's a rock chucker, whatever it is, the amount of force to pull down is going to be less down at the base, meaning less force exerted, more consistent pressure is being applied because you're not fighting that bottom section of your brass. So I have found on my Dillon, it actually takes a couple less numbers on my torque setting, which shows me less force is being applied. It also is going to apply less force to my tool head, meaning if I'm doing multiple steps on a tool head, I am going to be kind of affecting those other dies less because there's less torque being applied to them than before. The other really important thing about the Rollsizer from a competitor standpoint is that if I am eliminating or reducing clickers, then I am not coming out of position nearly to the extent that I would be if I had clickers. Because when I'm at a match, or when anybody's at a match or in a shooting position, hunting, it doesn't really matter, and you take a shot and you need to cycle another round, if you're fighting the bolt, which is what a clicker is going to do, it's going to force you to pop that bolt up. That is going to rattle your gun. That is going to put your gun out of position from where it was on the previous shot, no matter how good your setup is. It is going to force you to readjust, get everything back set up where it was, and then get your next round into the chamber. And if you're doing that 20 times or more at a match, whether you're shooting F-class, PRS, something like that, where you're cycling and cycling, that's a deal breaker when it comes to just mentally having one more thing to worry about. At a match where you are timed, it really could be a devastating thing. In F-class, you might be shooting in a paired fire situation, especially internationally. And if you have 45 seconds to take a shot and you're fighting with your previous round, your competitor takes a shot and now it's your turn again, and you're still fighting with it, or you're having to get back in position, that is time lost that should be focused on reading the conditions and making a good hold. No different with PRS, where you're on a timed stage if you're fighting with your bolt in some way. So really important things that are fixed or cured, depending on how you look at it, when you are using the Rollsizer on top of extending your brass life. So I think that those are, again, they're all sort of like these little outlying benefits. So can I tell you that if you buy one of these, your scores are going to just get cut in half or something? Absolutely not. I have shot very similar scores with or without the Rollsizer. It's not a magic wand. It isn't suddenly helping me, get 10 more X's or shoot that many more cleans or anything like that. But what it does is it makes my trip to those same scores a lot easier. And for that, I'm glad I have one. I hope this at least clears up a little bit about what the Rollsizer is, what you can do with it. And of course, if you have questions, just post them below. And if I have the answers, I will be happy to post them. If not, I will definitely get them for you. And with that, I hope you can get out and shoot, have some fun, and we will talk later.